Imagine being a parent in a small Christian village. You hear the sound of horses approaching. Your heart stops. They've come. The Sultan's men are here to take your son, and there's nothing you can do to stop them. This wasn't a nightmare. This was reality for millions of Christian families across the Balkans for nearly 4 centuries. The Devshirme system, the child levy, was one of history's most systematic programs of forced recruitment and conversion. But here's what makes this story even more complex. Some of these stolen children would rise to become the most powerful men in the Ottoman Empire: grand viziers, generals, advisors to sultans. They would command armies, shape policy, and rule over the very lands they were taken from. So what really happened during the Devshirme? How did Christian boys become Muslim warriors? And why did some families actually volunteer their sons for this system? Tonight, we're uncovering one of history's most controversial practices. But before we dive deeper into this incredible story, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We've been getting so many requests to cover Ottoman history, and we're delivering. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode like this. The Devshirme system began in the late 14th century, under Sultan Murad I. The concept was brutally simple. Ottoman officials would travel through Christian territories in the Balkans, Greece, Serbia, Bulgaria, Albania, Bosnia, and select boys between the ages of 8 and 18. These weren't random selections. The officials looked for specific qualities: intelligence, physical strength, good health, and potential. They avoided only sons because the economic impact on families would be too severe. They avoided boys from cities, preferring rural communities. The selection process was methodical and terrifying. Village by village, town by town, Ottoman recruiters would arrive with ledgers and authority. Christian families would be forced to present their sons for inspection. The officials would examine them, test them, and mark the ones they wanted. Imagine the scene. Mothers weeping, fathers standing helpless, children confused and frightened. Some families tried to hide their sons. Some tried to bribe the officials. Others mutilated their children, cutting off fingers or toes, hoping to make them undesirable for service. But resistance was futile. The penalty for hiding a child was severe: heavy fines, imprisonment, or worse. The Ottoman Empire had the military power to enforce its will, and Christian communities under Ottoman rule had no choice but to comply. Once selected, the boys were taken from their families, often never to see them again. They were marched to Istanbul or other Ottoman centers, a journey that could take weeks or months. Many were just children, torn from everything they knew. When they arrived, the conversion process began. They were circumcised, given Muslim names, and taught Turkish and Arabic. Their Christian identities were systematically erased. They were forbidden from speaking their native languages or practicing Christianity. But here's where the system becomes more complex than simple slavery. The most promising boys were sent to the palace schools, elite training institutions where they received education that rivaled any in Europe. They learned literature, mathematics, languages, military strategy, and statecraft. These palace schools produced the Janissaries, the Sultan's elite infantry corps, and the ruling administrative class of the empire. The brightest students could rise to positions of extraordinary power. They became governors, generals, and even grand viziers, the Sultan's chief ministers. Consider Ibrahim Pasha, born a Christian in Greece. Taken through Devshirme, he became the most powerful grand vizier in Ottoman history, commanding armies and negotiating with European powers. Or Sokolu Mehmed Pasha, a Serbian boy who ruled the empire as grand vizier for 15 years. This creates a disturbing paradox. The system was undeniably brutal, tearing children from their families and forcibly converting them. But it also offered opportunities for power and wealth that these boys could never have achieved in their Christian villages. Some historians argue this explains why, in later centuries, certain Christian families actually volunteered their sons for the Devshirme. They saw it as a path to influence, protection, and prosperity. A Christian peasant's son could become a pasha, wielding authority over thousands. But let's not romanticize this. The psychological trauma was immense. These boys were raised to serve an empire that had conquered their homelands. They were trained to lead armies against Christian kingdoms, sometimes their own people. The identity confusion must have been agonizing. Historical records show some Devshirme recruits secretly maintained Christian practices, hiding icons, making covert prayers, or helping Christian prisoners. Others fully embraced their new identities and became fierce defenders of Islam and the Ottoman state. The Janissaries themselves became legendary for their discipline, loyalty, and military prowess. They were celibate, forbidden to marry, entirely devoted to the Sultan. They wore distinctive uniforms with tall white hats and were feared across Europe as unstoppable warriors. But over time, the system began to corrupt. By the 17th century, Janissaries were allowed to marry and have children. They became a hereditary military caste, more interested in protecting their privileges than serving the Sultan. They staged coups, assassinated sultans they didn't approve of, and became so powerful and uncontrollable that they were essentially a state within a state. The tool designed to create absolute loyalty had become a threat to the throne itself. The Devshirme system gradually declined in the 17th century and was officially abolished in the early 18th century. The Janissaries themselves were finally destroyed in 1826 when Sultan Mahmud II massacred them in what's known as the Auspicious Incident. But the legacy of Devshirme shaped the Ottoman Empire for centuries. It created a ruling class that was ethnically diverse but culturally Ottoman. It turned conquered Christian populations into the backbone of Islamic military and administrative power. For the families left behind, the pain never disappeared. Mothers mourned sons they would never see again. Fathers wondered if their boys were alive or dead. Villages lost generations of young men to a system they were powerless to resist. Some boys never forgot their origins. There are accounts of former Devshirme recruits who, after rising to power, secretly helped their home villages or protected Christian communities. Others became the system's most zealous enforcers, perhaps trying to prove their loyalty. The Devshirme system reveals something uncomfortable about history, that oppression and opportunity can coexist, that victims can become perpetrators, and that human beings can adapt to even the most brutal circumstances. It wasn't simply evil, and it wasn't simply efficient. It was a system that stole childhoods, destroyed families, and forcibly converted hundreds of thousands of Christian boys. But it also created some of the most powerful men in one of history's greatest empires. And that complexity is what makes it so disturbing to contemplate even today.